Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And that is all kinds of comics. So that is individual issues, characters, themes, or runs on a comic where a writer and artist, or just a writer and artist, co-align in a kind of great magic. And the reason why runs are prominent, or individual contained runs, items of issues are prominent, is because of the way this event started. Mike was doing just a tour of Marvel's Epic Collection, the reprint line on his channel. And the Epic Collections are designed to capture runs. That's what they're for. They're not in completely sequential chronological order, so that the editors can put together a volume. Like, for instance, one of the most popular Epic collections is the Dark Phoenix saga for the X-Men. And the original printing of that has been gone for a while. And I think in July, Marvel is coming out with a reprint of that thing. And that is not out of order. There are plenty of X-Men issues that they haven't put in the Epic collection line. I think they're coming out with another one of those. And I horn my way in on the whole thing. But we're still preserving that we're not going in any kind of strict chronological order or anything like that. But because I horn my way in, Michael K. Vaughan gets to pick what we talk about each week. And as some of you bloodthirsty little marmosets have noticed, that sometimes puts us at loggerheads. Because his taste in comics is only really, really good when it precisely coincides with my own. But I hate to disappoint you, there is not going to be a bloodbath this week. And to give you a little bit of a spoiler, there is certainly not going to be a bloodbath next week. No, this week Mike picked a perfect thing. He picked a perfect comic. Much like, actually, Mike Mignola's Hellboy. That I would argue, after the first storyline, which was sort of scripted by John Byrne, Hellboy is pretty much perfect. No matter how nonsensical it is. I spent the whole of that video talking about how nonsensical a Hellboy story was, but it doesn't matter. It's still perfect. You still know you're in the presence of comic book perfection. Same thing is true of what we're doing today, because today we are looking at Marvels, which was a 4-issue miniseries written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Alex Ross, that originally came out in these issues. So these were $6 a piece, and they weren't like anything else on the comic stand, because you got a full painted cover by Alex Ross behind an acetate overlay. So you get the artwork without any interruption at all if you want it. These came out like this first. This was issue number 1. There is the Human Torch, the original Human Torch from the 1930s and 40s. Then issue number 2, same thing. These were beautiful. After the first one, I knew that I wanted these very badly. This is the Silver Surfer, arriving on Earth for the first time, that you can tell because there are rocks in the sky, floating in the sky. That's deeply connected with Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50. And that is the Human Torch reflected on the Silver Surfer. Then you have issue number 3, which is all about the mutant panic. And you have this beautiful cover where Warren Worthington III, the Angel, is saving a little girl, but the crowd is jeering at him. The crowd hates him. And those of you who know this issue, your heart breaks a little at this cover, because this, as far as we know, does not happen. This is the little girl is a very specific little girl in this issue, and we want nothing more than for him to swoop down and save her, and for it to be bright daylight when it happens. Jeering crowd or no, we want her to go to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters and just be protected and live there. And heartbreakingly, in the issue, this doesn't happen. It might happen in continuity, but we never see it, never get any hint of it. And then the 4th issue, which is the conclusion of this 4-part series, and also a heartbreak on steroids for those of us who were reading Marvel Comics from the beginning. I was reading Marvel Comics from the beginning when Stan Lee revamped all of these things and started bringing out first issues or first appearances in older comics. And by the time he and John Romita and John Buscema and all were getting their legs under them, by the time they knew what Marvel was, by the time they knew that they were on top of a genuine cultural phenomenon, I was reading these things, almost all of them. Not the Hulk, but almost all of these things, very much including Spider-Man. And there's a storyline in Spider-Man that we didn't have the internet back then. I had no idea what was coming. I don't think anyone did. I didn't know anyone at the time who did. My comic shop guy at the time, the guy at the newsstand who was getting the comics, he had not heard any warning about anything like this. There comes a story in Spider-Man where Peter Parker's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, is abducted by the villain, the Green Goblin, who all of you will know. You'll know this story because it's been filmed. But that, for those of you who are too young to remember the comics as they were coming out every month, that blunts the impact. Because the Spider-Man is fighting the Green Goblin on the top of the Brooklyn Bridge, and Gwen Stacy falls off the bridge. And Spider-Man whips out some webbing to her foot to catch her, and the abrupt stop snaps her neck. See it clear as day on the panel. Gil Kane includes the word snap, so that you're not left in any doubt at all. And I was reading the first issue of this. The first installment of Marvels is about the 1940s. It's about the original appearance of Captain America and Prince Namor the Submariner and the Human Torch and a whole bunch of other heroes. Then the second one is about the glory days of the Lee and Kirby run on the X-Men, specifically the arrival of Galactus and the Silver Surfer. And the third one is about the mutant menace and whatnot. And then by the time I was reading the third one, the third issue, this thing about mutants, specifically about that little girl subplotting this is absolutely heartbreaking. It's beautifully done. The human cost of this bigotry that sweeps over suburban America against mutants. We hear all the time in the X-Men comics about how the X-Men fight to protect a world that hates and fears them. But it's in issues like this that we see what that looks like. And by the time I got to those issues, I had a feeling that Kurt Busiek had the same sense of the great landmarks in Marvel continuity as I had. And I was kind of dreading what he would do for the fourth issue, the fourth and final issue of Marvels. And he did. He did. He went back to Gwen Stacy. The issue is called The Day She Died. And it's devastating. Just devastating. It takes you through that fight on the bridge. First, the main character. We'll get back to the main character. His name is Phil Sheldon. He's a photographer for the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson's paper. And he becomes fascinated with the superheroes. But we'll get to that. I'm doing this a little bit backwards because I just finished rereading this stuff, and the Sledgehammer effect is evergreen. I don't know how many times I've read this. I never stop. That effect never goes away. Before we get to that climactic fight scene, Phil Sheldon spends time with Gwen Stacy. They meet in diners. They meet in her home. They talk about her history with whatnot. They are actually present on the streets of Manhattan when Prince Namor the Submariner invades with all sorts of fantastical machinery from his undersea kingdom. And Gwen is amazed by the beauty of it all. Prince Namor is not attacking. He calls off the attack, but she's amazed by it. And it shows Phil Sheldon what a wonderful, pure spirit she is. You could say that he falls in love with her. You also get a little Easter egg here. This thing is full of Easter eggs. There are these monstrous creatures. Look at that artwork. Just implacably walking along. There's the Flatiron Building. They're just walking up Manhattan. And if you look in the window here, you see an archer. Okay, that's Hawkeye, but who are these two? That's Night Owl and Silk Spectre from The Watchmen. That's why this thing looks exactly like Night Owl's craft. But all this is going on, and, Prince Namor, of course, is there, and Phil Sheldon remembers seeing him in the 40s. That's the whole conceit of this thing. But then the Goblin abducts her. And Phil Sheldon is running. She'll be all right. She'll be all right. As he's going to the bridge. And he sees this epic fight between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. He sees that scene. Alex Ross pays Gil Kane and John Romita the honor of explicitly repeating it. There's no more powerful a way that it could be. But in this issue, because Phil Sheldon is everyman, he's not a hero, doesn't have any special powers, he's just an ordinary person on the street. That's why he has to take a taxi to follow the Green Goblin. In this issue, he does what every reader felt, which is that you can't bear it. You just can't bear it. So you shy away from it at the last minute. You don't want to look at it. He goes back to the bridge long afterwards and just stares at it. And the narration is, I read later, it was the shock of the fall that killed her, but it sure looked like, and he can't do it. He can't even make himself say it, that Spider-Man actually killed Gwen Stacy. He can't even make himself say it. And the story wraps up quickly after that. But that Phil Sheldon is the heart and soul of Marvels, because we meet him as a young man on the doorstep of World War II, when these weird beings are starting to appear, these fantastical beings. And the whole conceit of Marvels is Busiek telling the reader that you don't have to be all that old to have lived through the whole of the Marvel comics. If you were a young man in your early 20s when these beings started to appear, the Human Torch and the Submariner appears as well, and all throughout the series, Alex Ross steadfastly has him naked. He is not wearing little green swim trunks. He's not wearing anything. Alex Ross just very cannily always manages to put something strategic in front of Namor's frozen mackerels, if you know what I mean. Let me get you, like, there he's destroying a tank and it just happens to be in the way. that happens all throughout here. We get them, and we also get Captain America, who launches onto the scene, and there's a great narration because he is a Marvel that seems human. And Phil Sheldon and all of his compatriots notice that right away. They notice that all the kids love him and that he doesn't seem real. Notice how Alex Ross puts all of this in black and white. Not just the pictures in the paper, but the panels as well, to give it an old-timey newsreel feel. And Phil Sheldon says you couldn't go anywhere without hearing about it. Nobody admitted to knowing anything at the Department of the Army, but they were sure smug about something. And the headlines. I knew the guys who wrote the stories, and I still had trouble believing them. Nazi saboteurs, assassination rings, fifth colonists. Every day it seemed like it was something new. He strolled out of Nazi strongholds like he was walking through a park, shrugged off bullets and bayonets. And then we get that. And that is matched by an incredible scene in the next installment where Captain America returns. And Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek capture, see there he's in bright Technicolor, but they capture the wonder of what that would be like for people who saw him in World War II and thought he was gone forever, that he suddenly returns. And in the setup here, Phil Sheldon and all his other news hounds are naturally interested in the Marvels. They're something that has never been seen before. So Phil Sheldon starts to gravitate towards them. They make great photographic subjects. The whole world is interested in them. They're on the newsreels. And he pays a price for that, because he's at ground zero when the Human Torch and Prince Namor are having one of their many battles. And he is one of the many, many little pieces of collateral damage. Because keep in mind, that's the conceit of this whole thing, is that he's just a normal guy. What would a normal guy be doing? What would he think if he was told that the world was about to end? That Galactus was about to eat the world? What would he do? What would he think? We almost never get inside the heads of any of the heroes. We're always on street level saying, well, if the Hulk is fighting, if the Fantastic Four is fighting Dragon Man, they might collapse the whole tenement. That will mean you won't be able to drive by it. It will block traffic. Maybe you're late for your wife giving birth. Maybe you're late for a job appointment. That sort of thing is the focus of this thing. And Phil Sheldon is right there when the Torch and Prince Namor are fighting. Notice another strategically placed fireball there. And a piece of dislodged masonry smashes into his face and destroys one of his eyes. And that's just the way it is. He continues to be a photographer and actually gets posted to Europe. And he's writing back to his young wife and says, nobody has any idea what the future is going to bring. But you know what? It's going to be one heck of a ride finding out. And we get a huge double-page spread of Captain America and Bucky and Prince Namor and the two Human Torches, the Human Torch and Toro, and all these other World War II heroes diving in on a Nazi stronghold. And you don't know who these beings are. You've never had them named to you except for Captain America and the Submariner and the Human Torch. Doesn't matter, because you're not going to be inside their fortresses. They're not going to be talking to each other. You're never going to know what they say to each other, what they think. It's all going to be what filters through to the common man on the street. And that is just fascinating. And Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek fill these issues with Easter eggs. All kinds of things. Oh my God, they're everywhere. At one point, the young woman that Phil Sheldon wants to marry tries to make him jealous by going to a movie date with another man. And the other man's name is Bill Lumpkin. You would have to be a Marvel Comics fan to know that's Willie Lumpkin. the mailman at the Baxter Building, who volunteers his services to be a member of the team because he can wiggle his ears. You won't know that going through this, and you won't need to know it either. I should stress that. The Easter eggs are pure fun. They were also annoying for me at times. I had a typical Android's Dungeon condescending, pompous, overfed prick of a comic book expert who corrected me on this first issue of Marvels, and it came out 30 years ago, because I told him, I was no pun intended, but I was marveling at this, how wonderfully it was done. Even the first issue, I knew this was going to be an immortal piece of work, and Marvel has reprinted this regularly ever since. But I was marveling to this friend of mine about how many Easter eggs there are, how informed this is. I said, it's so wonderful to see, just that brief glimpse of the Angel. And this comic book, Pretentosaurus said, "Oh no, I think you mean the second issue. That's where the Angel appears." And I just let it go because, as you know, on this channel, if I've demonstrated anything, I've demonstrated that I am even-tempered and completely forbearing. That's the scene that I was talking about. I did not bother to tell my friend that is the 1940s superhero character called the Angel. Great number of people who were looking at this first issue thought that was Superman because he's in blue leotards with a red cape. But no, I didn't bother. Explaining to my frenemy what's going on. Instead, we just go through these issues, and they are incredible. I want to show you just one example of Alex Ross's artwork, because it's in this issue where Galactus attacks the Earth. And it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I want to show you. He describes the whole of this famous storyline where Galactus comes to Earth. Earth is found for Galactus by his herald, the Silver Surfer. Galactus eats planets. He absorbs and withdraws all of the living energy of a planet and leaves it a desiccated husk. And it's the Silver Surfer's job to find those worlds for him. And the Silver Surfer is eventually going to turn on his master because this world is full of living beings, full of passion. But Galactus doesn't care. Galactus does what Galactus must to survive. Now, you might think this is the piece of artwork that I'm going to show you, because how brilliant is it that Alex Ross gives the prismatic effect on the light. Gives us the light prisming off Galactus to be a kind of rainbow. That is just a brilliant, brilliant idea. But it gets better. As a Fantastic Four runs out to fight Galactus, notice Alex Ross patterns Mr. Fantastic after the Professor on Gilligan's Island. He just swipes the look completely. He does that throughout. A young Timothy Dalton is Tony Stark. And interspersed between the awestruck reactions of the press corps and the people on the street are these big panels of what's going on. Galactus assembling his world-eating technology on top of the Baxter Building. And we just periodically shift back and forth between these incredible Kirby-esque pictures and the everyman look on the street. And one of these pictures is the Silver Surfer fighting his master. Look at how perfectly the reflection mirrors what's down below it there. That is just amazing. That is a reflection on the bottom of the Surfer's board. And it's just incredible. It's so perfectly done. It foreshadows what all of that kind of perspective work that Ross would do so brilliantly in Kingdom Come. And Galactus leaves. He eventually leaves. The Fantastic Four win the day. The Daily Planet calls it all a hoax. And unlike all other newspapers that are shot, at middle length in a comic book, if you actually zoom in, this is original text. This is not Laura Ipsum type placeholder that you always see when you see newspapers reprinted. If you were to zoom this out, that is original text. That is columns of J. Jonah's articles saying that this is all a hoax. Why would an intergalactic being who eats planets have the letter G on his costume? And how convenient that the Avengers aren't in town and whatnot. But the fact that people have become so used to the Marvels that they grumble about this, that the Daily Bugle said this was all a hoax, that people on the street are saying, well, even if it was real, why didn't the Fantastic Four act sooner? Why did they let so much damage happen? And Phil Sheldon's had enough. He's a mild-mannered guy, but he's had enough. And he says, you people, what do you need? The world to actually end? Are you so busy digging for garbage that you can't even admit to yourselves that you're grateful? Why don't you look up? Why don't you, for once in your lives, look up? See how angry that is? Beautiful artwork. And he's pointing at the Baxter Building. And this issue, this is number 2, and it shows us that Phil Sheldon's idea of the Marvels is deviating from what normal people think. And it goes on that way because this just proliferates. Things just get more and more. And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. By the time you get to the sucker punch at the end of this, it is incredibly well earned. This is a gift to longtime fans of Marvel Comics, but unlike Kingdom Come, which is an incredible gift to longtime fans of DC Comics, unlike with Kingdom Come, this is not only a gift to longtime fans of Marvel Comics, but it's a perfect thing to hand to someone who doesn't know the long history of Marvel Comics. They're going to love it. It's great storytelling. Really, really well done. I would argue that if you want to do that, like I said, Marvel's reprinted these forever. If you want to hand it to someone, I would argue that you get an older hardcover or an older trade paperback, because I'm pretty sure that Marvel's will never be reprinted again without the PS, the coda, the little follow-up story that Busiek and Ross came together to do 30 years later. It was a one-shot, one comic book. It wasn't a whole series. But I'm pretty sure that no later reprint of Marvel's will have just these 4 chapters. They'll all probably include that. And the reason that you want to exclude that, you don't want to soil your eyes with it, is because it's a representation of institutional capture. It is a corrective in just the way that Marvel Comics now corrects its old-time viewers on everything. You are bad people. Your parents and grandparents are bad people. We'll still take your money for these overpriced comic books, even though they're really poorly done. But we want you to know and acknowledge that you are horrible, and that everyone in your family tree is horrible, and that your liking of these things was horrible. We'll fix them now. We'll have them be about exclusively female characters who never do anything except eat and talk about eating. We won't do anything like this anymore. But even so, even though this is a regular cash cow for the company that we hate, given to the fans whom we hate, we still want a corrective in every future reprint of this. And so they will reprint that coda. I would assume that that is in every later reprint of Marvel's. And it retells the story of, again, from the ground up, from Phil Sheldon's point of view, it tells the story of a famous X-Men storyline written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Dave Cockrum, where the all different X-Men encounter the Sentries, mutant-hunting robots, for the first time. And the reader of that issue, I read that issue when it came to the stands, and I was, of course, fascinated. How will this new team deal with these mutant-hunting robots? Well, that's interesting on its own, to see how that will happen. And Busiek and Ross redo that storyline, and they also fix it. So we're not talking about the laissez-faire racism or sexism of the 1940s. They're saying, pretty much explicitly, that Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum were also bigots, and that you're a bigot if you like those issues. Because one of the all different X-Men is the Irish superhero Banshee. And in the original Cockrum and Claremont issue, Claremont gives him an over-the-top cod Irish speech pattern. Oh, me boyo, and sure, and bigora, and all that sort of stuff. And the cute Busiek and Ross intentionally scrub that because it's, like, yikesy. Like, oh, this won't age well. Don't read the room. It's literally that PS, that coda to one of the greatest comic books in comic book history, is designed to say, well, this didn't age well. Well, Chris Claremont is still alive and revered by fans. Well, he was a bit of a racist. You know how this is. We're the only ones who are morally perfect. You suck, and he sucked, and Dave Cockrum sucked, and they were all racist. You're all racist. Everyone who created Banshee or any of these characters, you're all racist. Doesn't matter that all different X-Men had a Russian, a black African woman, Native American. Doesn't matter. We're the only ones who are perfect, and we say so on Twitter all day long. And unfortunately, it's a beautiful thing. It's beautifully done. But unfortunately, it will probably be included with these things from now on. It shouldn't be. But fortunately, that's the horrible end. But the fortunate part is that this has been so popular for Marvel that there are 1 million paperbacks to choose from. Just 1 million. So you can definitely do that. Most of the... let's see here. Let's see if I can quickly find the image. One of the most popular paperbacks, the one that really sold for Marvel, but people realized, oh wow, I'm looking back on this thing and I'm realizing I can reread it endlessly. It's just that good. Has this as the cover image. It's one of Phil Sheldon's greatest pictures, where he shows you what it would be like to be on the street when Giant Man covers a whole street with one stride. There's also a fantastic Spider-Man cover that they did. You can definitely find this. It's just, in this case, I urge you to read it, but in this case, I would urge you to get an earlier collection. Don't risk it. If you find this at your comic shop, turn right to the end. if at the very end, after the final pages, you're seeing the X-Men fighting Sentries, don't get the thing. So don't bother to read it. There's nothing wrong with the original issue. You spending money to see that thing is you tacitly agreeing that there was something wrong with that original issue. Just only way to get this this censorious blue checkmark nonsense to stop is to dry it up money-wise. That's the only way to get it to stop, is just not to endorse it with money. But the story itself, the story itself is great. Almost every issue has something that will break your heart. The first issue, our character loses an eye. The second issue, we get the strong sensation that the ordinary public that Phil Sheldon was a member of for a long time is starting to take the Marvels for granted, starting to think of them wrong, starting to not be grateful. Third issue has the first genuine emotional gut punch, which is the fate of that little girl, that little mutant girl. And then the fourth issue is Gwen Stacy. It's the death of Gwen Stacy, which old-time comic book fans very much remember that. Now it's a matter of course. Characters die 3 times in an issue. But then it was groundbreaking. Horrible follow-ups. It was horribly done. It was horribly handled in the Marvel Universe, even in those issues. But that issue itself, it was unbelievable. It was the second time that this had happened, because Gwen Stacy's father, Captain Stacy, also dies earlier. Also beautifully done. And you don't expect it. You just don't expect the supporting character is going to die. Captain Stacy had been in years of Spider-Man comics. So anyway, beautifully, beautifully done. So if you have not, I've talked about this comic many times on this channel. I did a chapter-by-chapter read-through with Matthew at Mayberry Book Club. If you haven't read it, you might want to give it a try, especially if you think you're not a comic book person. I think you might find it. Your library will have a copy, so you don't have to risk anything. And if you do, feel free to let me know. But anyway, that's an extra long video on Marvels. That's great. And if you think this video was long, you just wait until next week. I'll see you all then. Thank you.